Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, if a client confesses a murder to a counselor, does the counselor have to report it? I've heard a number of variants of this question as well. So not just murder, but other serious crimes like assault, kidnapping, bank robbery, drug trafficking, all kinds of things. So this is kind of a tricky question. And what I'll be talking about here in this video is not advice. If somebody's in this situation, they need to seek supervision, because I can't account for every variable in a situation like this. You really have to talk to a supervisor and work this out. But I can speak in general terms, and we'll take a look at duty to warn and duty to protect and the limits of confidentiality and some situations that may be relevant to this type of scenario. So the duty to warn and duty to protect are different for each jurisdiction. So another factor here would be looking into what the laws are specifically in the area where you practice. Now I'll be looking at this from the point of view of a mental health clinician, but also some of these factors are related to the client's point of view as well, and some really cover both. Now this may seem like a rare situation, but we do know that 40% of murders remain unsolved. And of course, high percentages of other serious crimes are unsolved as well. Many of these offenders do continue to commit crimes, so they could be in prison for something else, not the crime that they're trying to hide, like in a counseling session. But still, it's possible. There have been counselors who have been in this situation before, where they're working with clients, and the clients are hiding a serious crime. There's a serious crime in their past, and they want to talk about it, but they're a little wary of what the counselor is going to do. So to answer this question, kind of the default answer is no, but there are many exceptions. So if a client confesses they've committed a murder to a counselor, by default, the counselor has to keep that confidential. But as I mentioned, there are many exceptions. We call these the limits of confidentiality. So we look at the limits, we see if somebody's going to harm themselves or other people, somebody may be able to breach confidentiality in that situation. If a child, an elderly individual, or a person with a disability are being harmed, that could be a limit to confidentiality. Again, it depends on where somebody's practicing. If a judge issues an order for the mental health records, that would be an exception. If the client consents, that of course would be an exception. And in certain jurisdictions, there are other activities that may be reportable. And this is very dependent on where somebody is. Some of these jurisdictions even have events in the past that may be reportable. Something that's not ongoing, but something the client did a long time ago, even if the statute of limitations for the criminal component has already expired. So it just stresses the point here, which is to make sure you understand the local laws. So as indicated, there are a number of factors to consider here, and I'm just going to go through a few that I think are fairly important. So as we look at a situation like this, we'd want to know the nature of the crime. Was it an accident? Did it happen a long time ago or recently? Was it a deliberate crime that led to an unexpected outcome? So like a bar fight that resulted in somebody dying because they hit their head during that fight. So murder wasn't the intent, but a death still occurred. Was a weapon involved? What type of weapon? Gun, knife, poison? Did somebody use their bare hands? Were there conspirators? And are these conspirators going to know that the mental health clinician knows that the client told them, right? So will the conspirators find out that the client hiding the crime told the mental health clinician about the crime? Sometimes I call this the Jerry Oziel dilemma, right? Jerry Oziel was a therapist, specifically a psychologist in California, who treated Eric Menendez. And Eric Menendez, from the Menendez brothers' murders, he told Jerry Oziel that he had committed this murder, that he killed both his parents. And then his conspirator, his brother Lyle, found out, and that conspirator threatened Jerry Oziel. So the role of a conspirator can't be underestimated. Another factor would be, what about a manhunt? Is this a crime that was committed and the police are actively looking for the client? If that's the case, I mean, the police are only going to apprehend that client. I mean, they don't try to hurt innocent people, of course. But when they're chasing somebody who's dangerous, other clients in the area, other people in the area, could be in danger. In other words, if you're standing next to somebody who's wanted for murder, that's not always a safe place to be. Another factor here would be, is it gang related? Are there other gang members that might retaliate against this person? Are there family members that might retaliate against this person? So again, it just comes down to this idea of standing next to somebody who's wanted in any form, wanted by the police or wanted by somebody for revenge. You'd also want to find out why. What was the motivation behind the crime? Money, sex, revenge, anger, psychosis, like command hallucinations, when people hear things other people can't hear. This is associated with certain mental disorders like schizophrenia or sometimes bipolar disorder and some other disorders. So is there a mental health component? Also, were drugs a factor? Was somebody under the influence of drugs? So these are all potential motivating factors that somebody wants to consider. And another area would be, was the victim random, like just somebody being robbed for their money or their jewelry or something? Or if somebody is psychopathic and they just saw somebody and decided to commit a crime? Or did they target somebody? And of course, somebody in this situation could also be psychopathic, but did they target somebody specifically for revenge, like a family member or a spouse? How long did it take them to decide to commit the crime? Did they snap? Was it a moment of rage? Or was it premeditated? And sometimes crimes are a little bit in between. But that's important, because if somebody just kind of snaps and out of nowhere they can become violent, and they've done this several times, that kind of speaks to the danger that a mental health clinician would be in. Of course, if somebody premeditates crimes, that could be dangerous as well, of course, if they were planning on hurting the clinician. So I think it's important to know, although it may not be the most important factor that I'm talking about here. Another factor would be, is the client terminally ill or otherwise near the end of their life? Because this kind of speaks to perhaps a reduced motivation to conceal the crime. So another way of putting this is, do they have anything to lose? Are they really worried about other people finding out they committed the crime? What was their mental state and disposition at the time of the crime? And do they have the same mental state or other factors present now, or different factors? So I mentioned psychopathy before. Sociopathy would be another factor. If somebody's intoxicated or otherwise under the influence of drugs, and that's when they tend to commit crimes, that's important to know. Was there a pattern associated with the crime? So did they commit this crime or many crimes like the one they're talking about every time they used drugs? Every time they broke up with a romantic interest? Is one of those factors in play now? So just something to keep in mind. Another important factor would be, was the client arrested for the crime? Were they convicted of the crime? Or were they charged with the crime and took a plea bargain so they cannot be retried for that crime? So maybe they committed 10 crimes and they had charges dropped for 9 of them and they pled guilty to 1. Now, kind of the way this question is worded, it's really referring to somebody who got away with it. But still, sometimes people can be involved in the justice system in kind of a strange way where they really can't be tried again, or the charge can't be brought up again for a certain crime, even if they weren't convicted of it. And this speaks to kind of current safety, because somebody was arrested and convicted and sentenced for the crime. There's really no reason to harm anybody for knowing anyway, because everyone already knows. So again, like I said, the question kind of was more leaning toward if somebody committed a heinous crime and got away with it, but I would still want to ask the question. Perhaps it's not an issue because they've already served a sentence related to that crime, or again, that crime cannot be brought up again. Now, similarly, you'd want to know the statute of limitations. Now, of course, many serious crimes like murder would not have a statute of limitations, but some types of assault and drug trafficking and robbery certainly could have a period of time that would pass where a person can't be charged anymore. Now, this doesn't mean they want everybody to find out, but it could reduce their motivation to harm somebody based on the fact that that person knew. So, for example, if they tell a mental health clinician about the crime, if the statute of limitations is already expired, it really reduces the liability to the client, so they may not be as motivated to hurt that mental health clinician if that mental health clinician told somebody. Now, another factor would be, did they discuss this with their attorney, and do you have a release to talk to their attorney? So maybe they talked it over with their attorney, and their attorney said, no, go ahead and tell your counselor, that's okay. That would speak to the level of safety. And another factor, and this seems kind of obvious, but are they currently threatening the mental health clinician? So if a client comes in and they say they're hiding a serious crime, and they're threatening the mental health clinician, well, that makes the decision kind of easy, and I'll talk about that now. So all these factors are important, but the most important is this one. Is the client an ongoing danger to the public? Do they represent a danger to the public or a specific person, the mental health clinician, or themselves? Like, is there a suicidal risk, for example? So this is really one of the key exceptions to confidentiality. And sometimes mental health clinicians have asked me, they say, well, I understand the duty to warn or duty to protect, but what if the mental health clinician is the one in danger, right? What if, again, the client's hiding a dark secret about a crime, they tell the clinician, and now the clinician feels like they are in danger, the clinician's in danger. Well, the way I think about this is the mental health clinician has the same right to be protected, the same level of protection is afforded that clinician that the clinician would afford to the general public. So if you could tell, as a mental health clinician, if you could tell somebody else what's going on with this crime that's been reported to you, then you could take action to protect yourself, right? If you could warn somebody else or protect somebody else, you can protect yourself. That's how I look at kind of how the clinician's safety compares to the public. It's equal. So as I mentioned before, this is the duty to protect. So here again, you have to weigh all the factors I talked about and probably other factors I didn't think of. Seek supervision and make your best decision as a clinician. It's not an easy situation to be in. We have to remember when we think about like Tarasov 2, the case that kind of drove a lot of the cases in the various states, we see that protective privilege ends where public peril begins. So that's an important factor to keep in mind as you consider these decisions. And again, I can't stress enough, seek supervision. That's really one of the major keys to coming to the right decision in a case like this. Now, there are some other rare circumstances that I've been asked about that I want to discuss in this video as well, based around the same question. One is, what if the stress of knowing this type of information is something the mental health clinician can't handle? Well, then I would say make a referral. And this gets a little dicey because you have to be careful about the reason for the referral. You can't really lie if you refer a client to another clinician, but you could say, I prefer not to say, or the client's going to tell you, or whatever. This gets into a really dicey area with ethics. So if somebody can't handle this information and they have to make the referral, perhaps the clinician could sit down with the other counselor and the client at the same time and talk about that way. I don't know, but again, supervision would be helpful. Another question I get related to this is, what if the client murdered somebody that the mental health clinician knew? Well, this would be highly unlikely, but yes, I could see how this would be an impossible situation. I mean, a mental health clinician in that situation could make up a reason to call the police. They could simply lie because they want that person to get caught. I would really question if they could keep that secret at all, really in any way. And could the mental health clinician be effective in treating somebody if that client hurt somebody that that clinician knows? So, yes, I don't really see that as happening very often, but I agree with those that say it makes the situation really untenable. Like, I don't know how somebody could deal with that. Fortunately, again, I would say that almost never happens. Another factor similar to this could be, what if there was a really large reward? So what if the client had committed a crime and there's like a $500,000 reward or something really extreme for turning that client in? Well, I think many mental health clinicians would be tempted to grab that reward. Yes, they may lose their license, they may lose their career, but they're looking to cash out, just take the money and run. Now, there could be a civil suit that could take up a portion of that money, or maybe even more money than is earned in the reward. So it really becomes a matter of, does somebody want to sell out just to get the money? Again, I don't think this happens very often. I'd be surprised if this happens more than once or twice in a year in the entire United States, but there's always a possibility. There's a big reward there, and somebody's treating a client, and they start to make the calculations in their head and think, well, maybe I should turn this client in. I would hope that somebody would follow ethics and not chase the money, but it is a factor that perhaps a client would be concerned about. And this really brings me to kind of the client side specifically. When a client is hiding evidence of a serious crime, the fact they committed a murder or another serious crime, they're really in a tough place. You know, in terms of advice to a person like this, perhaps they'd want to speak to an attorney. Maybe they would want to discuss the limitations of confidentiality with the mental health clinician with giving no specifics, like saying hypothetically, if somebody committed a crime, what would a mental health clinician have to report, something like that. I think a client hiding a serious crime is, as I mentioned, in a tough spot, right? So people are going to see the records. Insurance companies can see the mental health records. There's the continuity of care exception, so other people in that mental health clinician's office might see them. Somebody might anonymously tell. There could be a data breach. Files could be examined like in a drawer, so there could be like paper charts, and a counselor could reach in and grab the wrong chart and read about the confession, so that could lead to somebody finding out. Mental health clinicians are often supervised, and the supervisor could just make the call to call the police. Now, we would hope the supervisor would make a good decision, but it's just another person seeing that information. So the bottom line is, of course, we want people to be helped with problems. And if somebody's hiding a crime and they need to talk about that to feel better or to move through a mental disorder or whatever, that's certainly understandable, but there always is a risk that somebody will find out what happened. Another important factor to keep in mind here is the threat of harm gives a mental health counselor and other clinicians a lot of power to act. And really, a client in this situation doesn't have a lot of recourse. I mean, somebody can complain, but okay, if somebody's in prison because they got caught, what good is it to complain? So that counselor is told, hey, you shouldn't have done that, or maybe they're given a letter of reprimand or something. Again, there's going to be a lot of sympathy for a counselor that's put in a situation where they're not feeling safe, or they feel like the public isn't safe. So again, I feel like clients hiding serious crimes don't have a tremendous number of options to feel really safe with the information. And again, if the information gets out, no matter who they complain about or whatever they do, they're still going to be caught for that crime, right? So it's really not going to matter much what happens to the agency or the counselor in terms of, being told they did something wrong. So this is kind of an interesting question to talk about. As I mentioned before, fortunately, these situations don't happen very often. A lot of times when clients come in and talk about crimes, they're crimes that are minor, and perhaps the statute of limitations has already passed, or they got caught. They were arrested, and they were tried and convicted, or pled guilty, and were convicted, and they already served their sentence. So kind of like the deep, dark, murderous secret, that's not something we see very often at all. So interesting to kind of look at this, though, because it kind of pushes the bounds in terms of like ethics and supervision, and we have to explore a lot of different angles. But realistically, it's not something that's going to happen very often at all. I know whenever I talk about ethics and serious crimes and situations like this, there are going to be a lot of opinions, people that agree or disagree with me or have other opinions. Please put those in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this video on what happens if a client confesses a serious crime to a counselor to be interesting. Thanks for watching.